She stood there, hands trembling, staring at the judge as he unfolded a piece of paper that no one in the courtroom knew existed. For 6 months, she had fought for her freedom. For 6 months, her family had prayed she would come home. But in that moment, as the judge's eyes scanned the words on that secret letter, everything she believed about justice, about truth, about her own future was about to shatter. What was written in that letter? And why had it been hidden from everyone until now? This is the true story of a 17-year-old girl we'll call Sarah Mitchell, whose life became a legal nightmare that would test everything she thought she knew about right and wrong. It's a story about secrets, about the fragile line between guilt and innocence, and about how a single piece of paper can hold the power to destroy or save a life. What you're about to hear actually happened in a courtroom in Ohio, and it reveals something disturbing about how justice can sometimes hang on the thinnest of threads. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Mitchell was not supposed to end up in a courtroom facing serious charges. She was supposed to be applying to colleges, going to prom, worrying about normal teenage things. But life had other plans. Sarah grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with her mother, Linda, and her younger brother, Marcus, who was only 12. Their father had left when Sarah was 9, and since then, Linda had worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. Sarah knew what struggle looked like. She saw it in her mother's exhausted eyes every night when Linda came home from her second shift at the diner. Despite everything, Sarah tried to be the responsible one. She maintained a decent grade point average, helped Marcus with his homework, and worked part-time at a local grocery store to contribute to the household income. Her dreams were simple but meaningful. She wanted to go to community college, study nursing, and eventually give her family the kind of stability they had never known. But on a cold evening in late October, everything changed in a way that none of them could have predicted. Sarah had been walking home from work around 9:30 at night. The streets in her neighborhood were poorly lit, and she always felt anxious during that 15-minute walk. That particular night, she noticed a car following her slowly, headlights casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Her heart began to race. She picked up her pace, clutching her phone in her jacket pocket. The car pulled up beside her, and the window rolled down. A man she had never seen before leaned out and asked her for directions to a nearby gas station. His voice was calm, almost too calm, and something about his eyes made her skin crawl. Sarah gave him quick directions and kept walking, but the car didn't drive away. It continued to follow her. Panic set in. She broke into a run, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Just as she thought she might not make it home, she saw the lights of a convenience store ahead and ran inside. The man in the car drove off. Sarah stood there shaking, tears streaming down her face. The clerk, an older woman named Dorothy, came around the counter and put her hand on her shoulder. 2 days later, Sarah saw the same car parked outside her apartment building. Her stomach dropped. She called her mother, who then called the police. When officers arrived, the man claimed he was simply lost and happened to be in the area again. The officers took his information but didn't arrest him. There was no evidence of a crime, just a scared teenage girl and a man who claimed innocence. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. Every sound outside her window made her jump. She felt hunted, trapped in her own home. She decided she wasn't going to live in fear anymore. She bought pepper spray for protection, even though she was technically underage to purchase it without parental consent. She told herself it was just for safety, just in case. She never imagined she would actually have to use it. 3 days later, as Sarah was leaving her part-time job at the grocery store, she saw him again. The same man, the same car. This time, he got out and started walking toward her. Her heart hammered in her chest. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the pepper spray, holding it in front of her with a shaking hand. She shouted at him to stay back, her voice cracking with fear. He kept coming. He said something about just wanting to talk, about how she had misunderstood him. But Sarah didn't believe him. Every instinct in her body screamed danger. When he got within a few feet of her, she pressed the button and sprayed him directly in the face. He fell back, clutching his eyes, screaming in pain. Sarah ran all the way home, tears blurring her vision, her whole body trembling. She thought she had protected herself. She thought she had done the right thing. But when the police showed up at her door 2 hours later, it wasn't to congratulate her on her bravery. It was to arrest her. The man, whose name was Robert Jennings, had filed a complaint claiming that Sarah had assaulted him without provocation, that he had simply been trying to apologize for scaring her days earlier. The officers informed Sarah that she was being charged with assault with a weapon. Her mother stood in the doorway sobbing, begging them not to take her daughter. But they did. Sarah spent that night in a juvenile detention center, confused, terrified, and wondering how trying to protect herself had turned her into a criminal. The trial began 4 months later. Sarah was assigned a public defender named Mr. Thomas Callahan, who assured her they had a solid defense. The courtroom was small, with wooden benches that creaked and dull beige walls. Sarah sat at the defense table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to keep her composure. Her mother and Marcus sat directly behind her. Across the aisle, Robert Jennings sat with his attorney, a sharply dressed woman named Miss Patricia Herrera, who had a reputation for being aggressive and relentless. Jennings looked calm, almost smug. The prosecution's case was straightforward. They argued that Sarah overreacted, that Jennings had never physically threatened her, and that she had used a weapon against him without legal justification. They brought in witnesses who testified that Jennings had no prior criminal record, that he was a family man with 2 young children. Miss Herrera painted Sarah as a troubled teenager with anger issues, someone who had let fear turn into violence. She questioned Sarah on the stand, asking her why she didn't just run or call the police instead of taking matters into her own hands. Sarah tried to explain that she had been terrified, that she had felt cornered, but Miss Herrera twisted her words. The defense countered by calling Dorothy, the convenience store clerk, who testified that Sarah had been genuinely frightened. Mr. Callahan also brought in a psychologist who explained how trauma affects decision-making, especially in a teenage girl who had been stalked multiple times. But the prosecution argued that fear doesn't justify assault. The jury listened intently, their faces unreadable. As the trial dragged on, Sarah began to lose hope. She watched as her mother aged before her eyes, the stress carving deeper lines into Linda's face. And then on the final day of the trial, something happened that no one saw coming. Judge Leonard Harrison called both attorneys to his chambers before delivering his final instructions to the jury. When they returned, they both looked shaken. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom holding a sealed envelope. He explained that he had received a letter the night before from an anonymous source, and after reviewing its contents, he felt it was his duty to share it with the court. The courtroom fell silent.
Judge Harrison opened the envelope slowly and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letter was from a woman named Karen Delgado, and what she revealed sent shockwaves through the room. Karen explained that she recognized Robert Jennings. 2 years earlier, her 15-year-old daughter Emily had been followed home from school by a man in a car matching Jennings' vehicle. Emily reported it to police, but nothing came of it. Weeks later, Emily was walking home from her friend's house when the same car pulled up and the man got out and tried to grab her. Emily screamed and fought him off, and a neighbor came running, causing the man to flee. Emily gave a description to police, but again, the case went nowhere. The family eventually moved to escape the fear. When Karen saw Robert Jennings' face in a news article about Sarah's trial, she immediately recognized him as the same man who had terrorized her daughter. She had been too afraid to come forward at first, but as the trial progressed and she saw a young girl's future hanging in the balance, she couldn't stay silent. Judge Harrison's voice was steady as he read, but you could hear the anger beneath his calm exterior. He looked directly at Robert Jennings, whose face had gone from smug to ashen. Miss Herrera objected, but Judge Harrison overruled her. He ordered an immediate recess and instructed the bailiff to contact the police to pull all records related to Karen's case. Within an hour, officers retrieved the old police reports. Emily's description matched Robert Jennings almost perfectly, down to a distinctive scar on his left hand. The prosecution's entire case crumbled. Ms. Herrera withdrew her client's complaint. Robert Jennings was taken into custody pending investigation. The courtroom erupted. Sarah's mother let out a sob of relief. Judge Harrison dismissed the charges against Sarah, stating she had acted in self-defense. He apologized to her and her family and commended Karen for her courage. As Sarah stood up, her mother wrapped her in a tight embrace, and for the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to cry tears not of fear, but of relief and vindication. Take a moment and think about Sarah's story. Think about what it must have felt like to be 17 years old, knowing that someone was following you, that you were being hunted. Think about the terror of having to make a split-second decision to protect yourself and then being arrested for it. How would that feel? Would you be angry? Would you lose faith in the system that is supposed to protect you? Sarah did nothing wrong. She trusted her instincts, she defended herself, and she survived. And if it wasn't for Karen Delgado, who refused to stay silent, Sarah's life could have been destroyed. Karen didn't have to send that letter. She could have stayed silent to protect her own family's privacy, but she didn't. She chose to act, and in doing so, she saved an innocent girl. Now ask yourself, what would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have used the pepper spray, or would you have hesitated? And what would you have done if you were Karen? Would you have had the courage to come forward? These are hard questions with no easy answers, but they force us to think about the kind of world we want to live in. Do we want a world where young women are too afraid to defend themselves because they fear legal consequences? Or do we want a world where their safety is taken seriously, where their voices are heard, where they are believed? Sarah's story is a reminder that justice is not always blind, that sometimes it takes someone willing to shine a light on the truth. How would you feel if this happened to you or someone you love? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you want more true stories like this, stories that challenge us to be better, then subscribe and turn on notifications. Our next story will be just as powerful.